Hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil Live. I'm Mike, and it's great to be with you here for a few moments. I thought it might be interesting for all of us to just jump on and talk about two big things that's happened today. One, of course, is the arraignment for Trezel and Jacqueline West in the new murder charges for Orrin and Orson West, and then we'll pop over and talk about the police officer in Louisville who was just acquitted of murder in the Breonna Taylor case, and we'll be talking about Brett Hankinson. So let's jump in and say hello to a few folks and start answering some questions. And please, let's just make this really interactive. I want you to ask questions. I'm going to chat a little bit. And we'll see what happens. We'll go for a few minutes, and if there are no more questions, we'll call it a day. We've got people from France on today. Nancy Penny from Winnipeg, Canada. Jessica, hello. Alicia, hello. Kimberly, gosh, nice to see you all piling in. And let's start seeing your questions in regard to these. If you have any questions, for instance. East Tennessee Life is asking, do you think the West children told authorities what happened? So you'll see later tonight my weekly crime recap. I actually pushed it off to do this live, but in my recap, I'm going to talk about the West case from a couple of different angles. First, the interesting angle of from day one. If you think back, Chief John Walker from California City said, I think it's a homicide. Of course, I think many of us felt that way from the beginning, but again, we have to watch these things kind of unfold. But it was about 3 months into that case that Bakersfield took the case back, or didn't take it back. They moved the case management from California City to Bakersfield. And lots of people theorized that was because of resources, that California City was just too small to handle an investigation like that, which in and of itself, an 8-person department is pretty darn small. But they had the backing of the county sheriff, Kern County Sheriff. They had the backing of the state criminal investigative unit, and they had the backing of the federal government. So they had all the help that they needed. So when that happened, it really caused me to think, now they have determined that those children probably died in Bakersfield. And I don't know if any of you watched my early videos where I kept asking that same question of that I wasn't sure that California City was the last place those children were seen. The thing that's so intriguing about that is if you go back in time to right after Bakersfield took it back, they started conducting search warrants out in the desert in western and southwestern Bakersfield, and actually a couple of locations. Well, you don't go looking around in those areas unless you're thinking that you're going to come across the body. And so that was really intriguing too. Now, so to your question, did the children say something? Well, it would only make sense that they would certainly query the children about the last time they saw the little boys. They would query everyone that they knew. And little children would probably have dates like they weren't around for Halloween or things like that, because it's believed that it was sometime in September that the little ones disappeared. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let's see. Interesting question, Sheila. How could they expect bail? Yeah, I don't think they expected that they would have any luck in arguing for bail, but that's exactly what a defense attorney is supposed to do, is try to get the best arrangement for their client as they can. And so obviously they're gonna stay in jail and face this thing from there. Now, the interesting thing will be when they have an arraignment, they decide whether they're guilty or not guilty, and they pled not guilty, and which most people do, especially in something as serious as this kind of a crime. Then the next step is going to be a series of hearings preparatory to a preliminary hearing. And in that preliminary hearing, the state has to show evidence. Now, the interesting thing is they had a grand jury, so they've already got that piece covered, and we won't see a preliminary hearing unless something weird happens that I've never seen before. But they'll be set for trial. And in the trial, then, of course, the state will put forth all the evidence. What a grand jury does is frustrating to those of us in the true crime community, because a grand jury hears the evidence and we never get to, other than the affidavit, which usually is written, and this one was written very superficially, just enough to get this thing into the grand jury and then the charges filed. And so having that indictment from the grand jury is like this went to a preliminary hearing and the case was heard and it was decided there's enough evidence that a reasonable person would think they're guilty. So that's going to be what's really intriguing, is to find out what the state has that suggests that the children were murdered and that it wasn't an accident or something like that. So that'll be interesting. Okay. I don't think there was anything really more to talk about on the West case, but I'm going to watch for questions. The back office is tied up being parents, and so they couldn't jump on with me at the last minute. But we'll see what happens there. Kimberly asks, does it look like the kids will have to stand against the parents in court? I mean, it's possible that they could question, but usually something like that, someone will testify, and then the defense will agree that that testimony is going to be admitted into court. The parents probably don't want their children testifying against them, so they'll probably find a way to allow that to be admitted and do it from there. So let's see. Question of Carrie: do you know if any claims that they have a pro bono attorney? I suspect that they both have public defenders, which are provided free of charge. And especially when you get into homicide cases, capital cases, the state will provide an attorney. It's just the system. And folks, we may not agree with the word deserve, but the Constitution provides that they will have fair representation during this hearing process. And we want that attorney or those attorneys to work their tail off in behalf of the Wests and do everything they can to make sure that every single right is protected. That gets frustrating to us when we watch cases like what's happening in the Morphew case and others, because we think, oh no, that should be admitted. But what we really want to do is make sure that evidence that is admitted can't be challenged later. And so we want an attorney that's really out there fighting for them and doing the best they can, which is a great segue to talk about this Breonna Taylor case and Brett Hankinson and get your feelings on what happened. I did notice someone up there said, originally I thought he was being, let's see, Dogs with Jobs. I thought the officer was being tried for accidental shooting into the neighbor's apartments, not for Breonna's murder. Two different cases. You are absolutely right. It was for what they call as wanton disregard and murder. And in that particular case, what happened is the officer stepped away from the doorway in what I call the fatal funnel, and he moved around to the side of the house and fired at the muzzle flashes from inside of the house that he could see. The problem is those bullets passed through the wall and into the apartment behind them. His bullet did not kill Breonna Taylor, but the argument was that he was recklessly firing his weapon, and that caused all of this to happen. So that was the reason for the charges. The thing that I found interesting, and I'm going to play a little clip from Court TV because I have spent a lot of time just doing some interaction during this trial, and I took some pretty heavy hits because I didn't think that this officer would be convicted. And frankly, I'm glad he wasn't. And that's not an indictment on the Taylor family, because I feel terrible for them that they've lost their daughter. It's not about that. This case was about whether that officer should be held at a standard of homicide when he was doing his job. Now, he may have done some things that a lot of people would not agree with, but again, I just want to make it very clear, folks. I'm not saying that anyone got what they had coming, but if you're going to point a weapon at police officers, folks, plan on getting shot, in my opinion. And I know that there are lots of things that people will say about what's right and what's wrong and whether they should have waited longer. But this case is a perfect argument for no-knock search warrants over what this was a no-knock search warrant, but then they decided to make it a knock and announce, which means boom, 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 hey, police, police, police. And they do that for a while until they feel like they've done it enough and they kick the door in, versus a no-knock warrant where they don't say anything, they kick the door in and then start yelling, police, police, police. And I'll tell you, as one who has been on those search warrants, both no-knock and knock and announce, a no-knock is safer for the police officer and in most cases safer for the people inside than giving someone time to set up a defense inside, which is what happened in this particular case. But I want to just play a clip from my comments with Julie Grant during the trial about the shooting and what I call a fatal funnel, or that area where the tactical officers were set up when they kicked open the door and the bullet started shooting. So let's watch that.
This testimony is all about what Brett Hankinson did and did not do that night in question. We're hitting pause. You're not going to miss a moment at the cross, but we have someone on the program that can really give us some more insight into what happened that night. And he's speaking from experience. We have with us retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King, is with us. Commander, good to see you. Tell me, from where you're sitting watching this case and looking at it as objectively as possible, and only based on what we know so far that is in evidence, what did Brett Hankinson do right or wrong in your view, please?
Well, it's great to be with you, and thank you. One thing that I have thought of over and again as I've watched the proceedings unfolding is that this is almost a moment where we need to also think about the demands. This officer was actually not a part of that team. It sounds like he was on an on-call basis where he was brought in. It was a minimum staffing issue where they had to bring in other people to do it. So it was a team that wasn't working together. That always creates some interesting challenges, but the protocols of going in and going through a doorway are pretty consistent. But I think it really speaks to the point of one of the things we're seeing in law enforcement right now. And in the last couple of years, we've seen this hemorrhaging occurring where law enforcement officers are leaving the job, in some cases because they don't feel like they're backed by the community. Other cases, it might be pay. In some cases, it's that they don't feel like they're being backed by their organizations. And it creates these vacuums where people need to fill in an overtime position. And so when you start using overtime officers, are they as sharp as they would be if they were only working one shift per day? That's really something that I think needs to be considered as this jury thinks about this case. I think the officer's doing a good job of trying to describe what happened. I can tell you from experience that it never goes like you hope it would go. There's always something weird that happens. And so it's going to be really important that this jury looks at the mindset of the officer. Was he completely out of control, or was he laying down fire that he believed would prevent that officer that was wounded from being further injured or others being injured? It's hard to justify the spraying of bullets, though.
Commander King, always great to get your insight. Thank you for all.
Well, what are your thoughts there, folks? I mean, my opinion was just stated. It is moot, in my opinion, but it was the direction that I felt this case would go, and that is that the jury would discover that the officer's mindset at that time wasn't to maliciously shoot his weapon wildly through the wall. He was trying to save another officer. And if you go back and watch this case in close detail, the first officers through the door, one of those officers was shot by the suspects inside, one of which was Breonna Taylor. And there is a discrepancy because the officer testified in the trial that that Breonna's boyfriend said it was her that was shooting the weapon. Now, others have argued that it wasn't. I don't know. I wasn't there, but that's what the evidence was that came out. But irregardless, an officer was shot and fell to the ground, and the officers were returning fire. And then this officer, Hankinson, stepped away from the door and went around and flanked the side of the house and fired in. And it was those rounds that went into the other apartment. And those people have every right to be really concerned about the fact that some of the bullets were spraying wildly, but that doesn't mean that the officer intended to commit a murder. He was trying to lay down cover fire. He was trying to save an officer. He was trying to subdue a violent suspect. And this sadly turned out the way that it did. Really, really difficult. Now, the thing that I found interesting is I'm going to pause first and just read some of your comments. Weren't they at the wrong address when the no-knock thing happened? The person they were looking for wasn't even there. I think you're confusing that with a different case, Carrie. I'm not exactly sure. But in this particular case, there was some question of whether this particular Brett Hankinson went to the wrong address at first. He didn't. He went to the right building. He pulled up down this on the opposite end of the building and approached quietly. Again, they're serving a felony warrant on suspected drug dealers, and they believed that there were weapons, which it proved that there were. And so the prosecution, I thought, was pretty darn aggressive. At times seemed angry. It was odd to me because it made it difficult for the truth to really come out. But there was an interesting exchange during the interview of Hankinson himself, the cross-examination on the stand, where the defense made sure that Hankinson was very respectful. And the prosecutor was really hard-hitting and aggressive, and I think it backfired. I think it was troubling to the folks there. Now, as this thing went on, I made another comment or two on Court TV. I wanted to play that and just get your thoughts. Again, we'll see what happens on this. I was on with a defense attorney who made some quick comments about Hankinson's testimony. And then, of course, I added some additional content to this. So
that you're going to stay with us.
We'll
we
join
want you
in
at
and
home to
catch
do the
this
same.
now. Should be starting with this segment here.
Before we go to break, let me bring in my guest. We have with us criminal defense attorney Daryl Cohen and retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Boy, oh boy. Okay, Daryl, let me go to you first. From an advocacy standpoint, is this the point, if you are defense counsel, that you really have to worry about for your client?
No, and I spelled that N-O, not K-N-O-W. I think he is testifying well. He's standing. He's not tottering. He's not teetering. He's being, if you notice, extremely courteous to the prosecutor, always answering, yes, ma'am. No signs of disdain or irritation. He's doing exactly what he should be doing. He's testifying the way he should testify. He's matter-of-factly testifying, but also trying to show empathy and sympathy toward what happened. I like what he's doing. If I were the defense lawyer, I'd just leave it alone. Don't mess with it. Let it be.
And Daryl, he hasn't made any objections during this cross. I mean, we haven't seen one. She's just going and going, and perhaps he thinks it's helpful. As you're saying, Commander King, talk to me about being in that position that Brett Hankinson found himself on March 13th, 2020, where all the facts as we know them. You pointed out earlier, he's volunteering essentially to work this overtime shift. He's a canine handler typically, briefed on the situation, goes there, and we know, the result. What's it like being in that situation where your fellow officers are being fired upon and you're trying to protect them?
I think one thing that's really interesting is the prosecution is really spending a lot of time on that little vestibule right before they enter the apartment and how stacked up they are in there, which in that smallest space has to happen as you move officers through, because you want to expeditiously clear each room and safely get control of the people inside, the suspects in this case, and make sure that that is done as most quickly as possible. The challenge becomes that you are jammed into one small spot, which creates a fatal funnel, for lack of a better term, when bullets start flying from the suspects back toward police. And man, the bravery of these officers to keep going in under fire, I am not going to even begin to try to understand and challenge what this particular officer did in the course of trying to defend his position and protect his partners. But I think it's really important for the public to understand that this was a perfect example of why we need no-knock warrants, not knock and announce where people have time to prepare. These people had a weapon inside. What happened was a tragedy. The inability to keep track of those rounds was a tragedy. But these are the kinds of cases, to me, that shout. But I'm really concerned about officer safety and the extended public in these kinds of things, and getting these cases or these individuals under control as quickly as possibly with the least amount of impact. And when you're going and knocking and announcing, you're just telling bad guys that you're there and waiting.
Appreciate you giving us that other side, as there's been so much focus on the danger of these no-knock warrants. Mike King, I really appreciate your expertise, and Daryl Cohen, yours as well.
Well, so let me answer any questions on this. I can tell from the chat that most of you are still pretty stressed out over the West case, and thankfully you are worried about those little boys. And we don't want to belabor this, but this is an important case today. And of course, that I felt it was strong enough that I wanted to talk about it. I guess the question I have is, how do you feel about that not guilty finding? And please fill in some spaces below and let me know how you're thinking and what you're thinking. Now, I probably missed some important questions regarding some process and procedure around what's happening in the West case right now. So if there is something that you want to bring up again, I'd be happy to look at that and see if I can maybe shed some light based on what I understand in the case. But we'll just see where it goes from here, and answer a few questions. Let's see. Thanks, Julianne Turner. That's very nice of you. Yeah, I feel the same way. May justice prevail. Let's see. I like this. I'm glad we are on a first name basis. Thank you, everyone. I used to work for a chief that I had a great deal of respect for. And I remember one day after some staff meetings, he said, "Mike, just call me Joe." And I said, "I certainly will consider that, Chief." And we moved on. So anyway, for whatever that's worth, I'm starting to ramble. That's not a good sign. So let's see. Now, I find this kind of interesting, Jack. Whichever dirtbag is responsible for shooting her should be facing murder charges. If Jack, are you responding to the Breonna Taylor case? And I guess I would just ask you, and I'd ask others, why you think the officer that shot her, if they're returning gunfire and one of the other officers has been shot allegedly and in court by testimony by her, why would you think that officer should be um, convicted of murder? That's interesting, and I really appreciate you being willing to say that, Jack. So please maybe throw out some ideas on that, and folks, tell me what you think, because I don't know. That's a tough one for me. I mean, I'm a firm believer. You point a gun at police, you might get shot, and I don't know. It's a tough one. Let's see. Gayla says the officer shouldn't have been charged. Wendy Henschel says, will California revoke adoptions on the other two children? Man, what a cool question. And it would seem to me that there certainly would be efforts underway immediately to get those other children into different foster care, which they probably have been for some time anyway. Whether they will be adopted out or not now is really interesting. And I wonder, I don't know the law around that. I mean, that's a really interesting question, because I don't know whether the state, if they've been legally adopted into a family, could reverse that, but other family members might be asked to take those children. So that would be really interesting. Great question. Thanks. Hey, Joanne Murdoch, thanks for reaching out from Australia. I don't know if you caught me this week on 60 Minutes Australia, but we are trending #2 in Australia right now in social media for our Mr. Cruel investigation. And so I hope you're watching, or you got to watch that. Let's see. Renee Flynn, did they say how they know the boys are dead? I'm really confused on that. I am confused as well. And the district attorney did say that that would come out in the trial. So apparently they had enough solid information to convince a grand jury and to have that charge and the indictment go through. So no, they haven't revealed that. And it's going to be really interesting to see how all of that unfolds and what might leak out as time goes on. Yeah, good question. Let's see. Here we go. K-Cat. I'm not sure how to feel. I keep going back and forth. I'd hate to be those neighbors, but I also study criminal justice, so I see the officer safety side. Man, I would hate to be those neighbors too if bullets were ripping through my home. I mean, there is something wrong with that. Now, is it murder? That was the question today. Doesn't mean that there weren't things that went wrong and things that needed to be fixed, but the jury said today, in 3 hours no less, they said no, that was murder. Was not murder. So now here's an interesting question: aren't officers trained to acquire target before? So Ann, you're absolutely right. There is a responsibility when you point and fire your weapon, that you have this target acquisition, that you understand also what's downrange. Now, in the middle of a gun battle, I'll just tell you that sometimes it's hard to keep all of those rules in place, and that's why you train over and over again. But part of what this officer testified he was doing was laying down gunfire in hopes that they could pull that injured officer out of that hallway. And it sounds like the jury was sympathetic to that, but you're absolutely right. You still need to have target acquisition, and you have to have an operational understanding of what's happening around you. But those are pretty tough when you have all that stress. And let me tell you, I only fired my weapon once in the line of duty, and I never thought about what to do. I reflected back on training, and when you have a microsecond to make a decision of whether to shoot at someone or not, it is not something that you sit down and think about. That decision in your mind was made a long time before that when certain things happen and certain levels are reached, then you're authorized to use lethal force. So the thing that we try to get officers to do is we try to get them to consider the value of cover versus simply concealment when they're sneaking up, so that if someone does pull a weapon on them, they have that extra fraction of a second because they have cover to be able to make a little better, more sound decision. But once it starts, I mean, I think in that particular case, they said that one officer fired 9 rounds in less than 4 seconds. These things happen fast, and it's not a long thing like in the movies. I don't know. I hope that was helpful. So let's see. If the other boys were involved in murdering their brother, can they be charged? Of course, you would have to do it in the juvenile court system because they're small children, and I think it would be pretty hard to prove that that little tiny family somehow convinced their kids to do that. But who knows? Hey, thanks, Julianne Turner. I haven't seen 60 Minutes yet regarding Mr. Cruel, but you did catch my stuff on the Beaumont children and others. Yeah, so thanks. That's been a lot of fun to do some of those cases down in Australia. So, well, folks, it is an honor to be with you when we get the chance to get together. I appreciate you jumping on at the last moment and taking a part of this. I hope you're considering our channel memberships. You can get in like for $1.99 a month, and it really does help us if you're interested. And we also have the academy level where we look at profiling principles and we dive a little deeper. It's a first run at things that others won't get to see for months, and hopefully is worthwhile in that regard. Thank you for all of your support, and we'll see you soon. Now, tomorrow, I might be publishing something on Mr. Cruel. We'll just wait and see what happens on that. And then we'll just plan on seeing you, for those of you who are in the Academy class, on Monday night. And then Tuesday, we'll be back talking Colts again. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate all the support and the friendship. And to all of you, I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks a lot.